I didn't plan to change the course of human history on a Tuesday. I was just trying to get through my shift without spilling anything, starting any wars, or thinking too hard about home. 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. I was managing fine until the chocolate. My name is Sergeant Dario Reyes, and I was posted to Veth Station 8 months ago. If you've never heard of Veth Station, that's because nobody talks about it. It sits at the edge of the outer corridor like a bad tooth that nobody wants to pull, too important to remove, too uncomfortable to ignore. 3 species share it: humans, krethians, and surathi. The krethians are tall, armored, and operate on a strict code of honor that makes most military rulebooks look like a suggestion box. The surathi are smaller, insectoid, and so deeply communal that the idea of doing anything alone, eating, sleeping, making a decision, is genuinely disturbing to them. And then there are us, humans, the peacekeepers nobody asked for, doing a job nobody thanked us for, in a station that smelled like recycled air and old arguments. I was a logistics officer. Rations, supply routes, shipment schedules, boring work, and I was good at it, which meant I was invisible, which suited me perfectly. I kept my head down, filed my reports, and on the hard days I thought about the Toblerone bar sitting at the back of my locker. My sister had sent it 3 months ago in a care package that also included a handwritten note, 2 pairs of wool socks, and a photograph of our mother laughing at something outside the frame. The chocolate was the last piece of home I had left. I was saving it for the anniversary, 3 days away. Our mother had loved chocolate the way some people love music, deeply, personally, as if it said something true about the world. Every year since she passed, I ate something sweet and thought about her for a while. It was a small ritual. It was mine. I almost ate the Toblerone that Tuesday morning. I was tired, and it had been a long week, and it was sitting right there. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and then put it back. Not yet. I pocketed it instead, some strange impulse, and headed to the ration checkpoint. She was in the corridor outside the rationing bay. Surathi are not easy to read if you don't know them. They don't have faces the way we do. They have compound eyes, segmented bodies, and chromatic plates along their upper thorax that shift color the way a human face shifts expression. This one was young, 12 years old in human terms, maybe less. She was crouched low against the wall in the posture that my training material described as passive threat reduction, which meant she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Her chromatic plates were a dull, flat gray. My translator was clipped to my collar, and without asking it to, it quietly produced a single line of text: distress hunger pheromone detected. Intensity, high. I stopped walking. I had heard about this situation but never seen it. Surathi operate in communal units, groups of related individuals who share resources, decisions, and legal status. If you become separated from your unit on a station like this one, you fall into a bureaucratic gap. You are not registered as an individual. You have no ration allocation of your own. You wait until you are reunified, however long that takes, and in the meantime, you receive nothing. It was not cruelty exactly. It was simply how the system was built. The Surathi who designed it had never imagined a child sitting alone on a cold corridor floor, while other species walked past her without slowing down. I watched 3 Krethian honor guards pass her. They didn't look at her. Not out of meanness. It was almost more unsettling than that. She simply did not register as their concern. She was outside their unit, outside their hierarchy, outside the calculation entirely. I stood there for a moment. I thought about my orders. Colonel Chen had been very clear when I arrived. Do not insert yourself into alien politics. Do not create incidents. Do not make things more complicated than they already are. I understood the reasoning. One wrong move on Veth Station could unravel months of fragile diplomatic patience. Then I looked at the girl again. Her mandibles were trembling slightly. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a person's hands tremble when they've been holding something heavy for too long. I reached into my pocket and took out the Toblerone. She looked at it without understanding. I sat down on the floor next to her, which I suspect was already violating 3 protocols, and I broke off a piece. I held it out. She didn't move. I mimed eating, put a piece in my own mouth, made the kind of face my mother used to make when something was genuinely delicious. The girl watched me with those large, faceted eyes. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the piece I was offering. She put it in her mouth. What happened next is difficult to describe accurately. Her chromatic plates, which had been flat gray, erupted into color, not gradually, instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. The pattern moved across her thorax in waves. Deep violet, then gold, then a shifting, rippling pattern of both together that my translator struggled with for a full 3 seconds before producing its best attempt. Chromatic display, deep gratitude, category, sacred, cross-reference, pattern reserved for hive mother acknowledgement. I didn't know what that meant yet. I thought she just liked chocolate. Looking back, of course she liked chocolate. Sugar and fat and something warm and sweet, and entirely unlike anything her biology had ever processed before. But the display wasn't about the flavor. I would learn that later. At the time, I just sat with her until she finished the piece, made sure she was okay, and then flagged a Surathi station worker to come assist her. I gave her the rest of the bar. She held it with both forearms pressed together, which I would also come to understand later. Then I stood up, dusted off my uniform, and went back to work. My communicator went off 11 minutes later. It was my CO. Her voice had that specific texture that meant she was controlling something very carefully. She said my name once, then said, "My office." "Now." Then she said, "Don't stop to talk to anyone." I walked into Colonel Chen's office expecting a reprimand. What I found was something I had never seen in 8 months on that station. Commander Veth Haral, the Krethian station authority, was standing on one side of the room. Communion Keeper Siseth, the senior Surathi representative, was standing on the other. They were not arguing. They were not leaving. They were simply in the same room, which on Veth Station was remarkable enough to qualify as a diplomatic event. Visaki, I learned her name then, from Siseth, was sitting beside the Communion Keeper, still holding the foil from the chocolate. Siseth spoke first, in slow trade standard, with my translator filling the gaps. She explained that there had been witnesses on the observation deck above the corridor. Not 2 or 3, 7, including 2 Surathi Communion Keepers and 4 Krethian honor guards. They had seen the chromatic display. And under Surathi law, when a witness obligation is invoked, when enough credible observers witness a significant act, the entire delegation is bound to formally acknowledge it. Then she explained what I had actually done. In Surathi culture, sharing food is not a simple gesture. Sharing ordinary food means you are friendly. Sharing rationed food means you are generous. But sharing your last food, specifically, explicitly, the final portion of what you have, with a stranger, is something else entirely. It is the highest declaration of kinship the Surathi recognize. Not friendship, not alliance, family. By giving Visaki the last of what I had, under Surathi interstellar custom, formally claimed her as my unit. I had adopted her, legally, across 3 star systems. I looked at Colonel Chen. She was looking at the ceiling. Veth Haral spoke next. His voice was low and deliberate, the way Krethians always speak when they are being careful. He said that the Krethian Dominion had no legal objection to the Surathi designation. What he had an objection to, he said, was not understanding what I had done or why. He had spent the last 11 minutes having his research adjutants pull every recorded instance of human resource sharing behavior in the Krethian military database. There were many instances, an alarming number of instances. Humans giving food to injured enemies. Humans giving water to prisoners. Humans giving their own rations to civilians in conflict zones. There was a flag on the file. It had been there for years. The flag said, in Krethian military classification language, unknown threat vector, behavior pattern, inconsistent with known strategic models. He wanted to know if I would explain myself. I thought about it for a moment. I thought about what the real answer was, and whether it would be useful, or whether I should try to find something that sounded more impressive. Then I decided that I was tired, and the real answer was probably fine. I said, she was hungry. I had food. That seemed like enough reason. The room was very quiet after that. The Surathi Communion Keeper made a sound that my translator marked as untranslatable, which in my experience usually meant it was translating something emotional rather than informational. Veth Haral looked at me for a long time. Then he said something to his adjutant in Krethian. My translator caught the edge of it. They do not calculate the boundary of their unit. There is no boundary. Whatever he meant by it, he said it the way you say something you have been trying to figure out for a very long time, and have only just understood. The next 48 hours were not something I could have predicted or prepared for. The witness obligation spread through the Surathi delegation. All 200 individuals on the station were now ritually aware of what had happened and bound to acknowledge it. Word reached the Krethian officer corps that Veth Haral had requested an unscheduled joint session. The station's political monitoring system, which my CO checked every morning, flagged 17 new diplomatic threads opening simultaneously, all originating from the corridor outside the ration bay. Colonel Chen found me eating alone in the mess hall the next morning and sat down across from me. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at me the way my teachers used to look at me when I had done something that was technically correct, but also somehow completely outside the bounds of what anyone had imagined. She said, "You understand that we have been trying to get observer status with the Surathi for 3 years." I said I did know that, yes. She said, "And in your assessment, the correct approach was chocolate." I told her it wasn't really an assessment. She closed her eyes briefly and said she was aware of that, which was what concerned her. The joint session happened on Thursday. It was the first voluntary Krethian-Surathi joint meeting since the ceasefire. The room was full of individuals who had spent years carefully avoiding exactly this kind of proximity to one another. Visiki sat at the center of the table. I sat beside her, because Sisoth had formally indicated that my presence was required as her designated provider unit, a term that apparently meant guardian, sponsor, and kinship anchor all at once. Veth Haral addressed me directly, on record, with the session being transmitted to multiple systems. He asked me the same question again, more formally this time. He said, "Human Reyes, in the moment you gave your resources to the unaffiliated juvenile, what was your tactical calculation?" I said I didn't have one. He said, "Then what guided you?" I thought about my mother. I thought about the way she had once, during a very bad winter, when we had very little, given the last of our bread to a neighbor she had never particularly liked, and then come home and made soup from whatever was left in the cabinet, and acted as if she had simply made a reasonable decision about bread. I thought about how I had asked her once why she did things like that, and she had looked at me the way adults look at children when the answer seems obvious and said, "Because she needed it, and I had it, and what else would you do?" I told Veth Haral that. I told him as simply as I could. The Surathi communion keeper displayed the grief recognition pattern. I had learned enough to read it by then. They were not sad, exactly. They were mourning something. I learned afterward that they were mourning the years spent assuming all other species built walls around their care the way the Surathi did, the way the Krethians did, the way nearly every species in the known systems apparently did. They had not imagined something that didn't calculate the wall at all. At the end of the session, the Surathi formally registered me as Visiki's provider unit under Interstellar Compact. The legal consequence of this, which my CO explained to me with an expression I can only describe as bewildered relief, was that I was now her guardian, and as her guardian species, humanity was granted communion voice, the formal right to speak in Surathi collective deliberation, a diplomatic access level we had been requesting for 3 years, through every official channel available to us. Veth Haral, quieter, and with less ceremony, filed a reclassification in the Krethian Dominion's internal registry. My translator was not in the room for this, but his adjutant passed me the official notation afterward. The translation was approximate. It said something like, "Species whose unpredictability is structurally benevolent, approach with extreme caution and equivalent respect." I'm writing this from my new office, which has a window, which is more than I've had in years. My official posting is Earth's first diplomatic liaison to the Surathi communion. I have a desk, a coffee machine, and a framed photograph of my mother laughing at something outside the frame. Visiki visits twice a month, and has developed opinions about every type of chocolate I've introduced her to. She prefers dark chocolate, unsurprisingly. She says milk chocolate is too soft in a tone that suggests she has given this real thought. A full case of Toblerone arrived last week, sent through official coalition supply channels, flagged as diplomatic materials. My CO authorized it without comment, which I considered a kind of apology. I haven't opened the case yet. I'm waiting until I need it.